Hi everyone, the Random Home Cook here. In this video I want to share my opinion on what I think are some key tips for making the perfect pasta dough, or at least perfect to me and very appreciated by the people I share it with, which I believe goes beyond to just the recipe. Online there are, however, many videos on how to make the pasta dough. Therefore, while I show how I make it, I decide to talk about details I believe important that I think are often overlooked. I will talk about various types of pasta I make, from plain to stuffed, and dishes I cook with the various types. So let's begin from the ingredients as usual. Today I use 6 eggs and around 555 to 580 grams of flour type 00. I start with the 555 grams and salt, and I will use the machine because I have it. It is less messy and less effort, although it might take a little longer than doing it by hand. I put the flour in the machine and then I break each egg in a separate container. This is an habit, and although it never happened, if an egg is gone bad, I will not ruin all the other ingredients. Then I add a generous pinch of salt for each egg and a little more for the flour. While the ingredients are mixing, let's talk about ratio between eggs and flour, which is my first point for importance. My rule of thumb is generally nearly 100 grams per egg. However, the exact amount for a perfect dough depends on 3 main factors, in my opinion: the pasta I want to make, the size of the eggs, and the weather, or more simply the humidity in the house. The first step to make a perfect pasta dough is to decide which pasta I'm going to make. In particular, how many times I will remix the trimmings. Remixing the trimmings will make the dough drier and harder to work, as the trimmings lose water and humidity during handling steps. It is in fact easier to work longer a dough if there is a higher content of humidity within limits. For example, it is essential for stuffed pasta to be very stretchy and pliable to avoid rupturing and make my life way easier while I'm doing this job. Furthermore, because I like my pasta very thin that melts in the mouth, the drying process is accelerated. A dry dough not only would make almost unusable the trimmings, but also the pasta would stiffen before even being folded. And lastly, a dry pasta will not stick and close perfectly the seams, causing the rupture of the stuffed pasta while cooking. On the other hand, if instead I want just pasta dough for making pasta sheets, for lasagna for example, the moist content is less important, because once processed, if the pasta dries a bit, it doesn't matter. Actually, a fast drying time is sometimes desired to reduce the amount of flour needed to avoid the pasta to stick on whichever surface I put the pasta to dry. The second point is the size of the eggs. Larger eggs can easily moist 90 to 95 grams of flour. But not all eggs are the same, and therefore I prefer to add flour to dry the dough, if too moist, than adding water, which is messier and not easy to incorporate. The last parameter, weather and humidity in the house, can accelerate drying or keep the dough soggy and sticky. Normally, the first one is my major problem. The second one can be easily fixed by adding a little bit more flour. So, long story short, I use 93 to 95 grams of flour per egg, and then I dust and incorporate more depending on the needs and the pasta I want to make. But let's go back to the pasta dough situation in the mixer. At this point of the mixing, I test to see if all came together and if the moist content is as I want. Then I let it continue mixing, or I can add a little bit more flour, and in those rare occasions where it dries a little bit too much, if the eggs, for example, are too small or it is a particularly dry day, I add some water, just a tablespoon at a time. If I'm happy with the moist content, then I let it continue to mix. This brings me to the second point I want to highlight, which is the various types of pasta that can be made at home, using nothing but a knife, simple tools, and a little bit of patience. Here, the most common types of pasta I make regularly. Pasta sheets that I use for lasagna, or for stuffed pasta like tortellini. Here, how they look when they are cooked in stock, or here, dressed with cream and sage sauce. Or I use the sheets for ravioli, in this picture, orderly aligned for an easy count at the end. There is some pride in knowing if I made 250 or 300 of them in a few hours. And here, how they look when I cook them as I normally have them in a meat sauce. Other types of pasta can be made by rolling and cutting the pasta sheets to obtain various shapes, like tagliolini or pappardelle, as well as maltagliati, that roughly translates as badly cut. While I add some flour to the pasta dough, because I think the pasta is too moist, let's talk about thickness of pasta. This detail is really important, and especially important for me in stuffed pasta. This is because I'm used to eat and make very thin pasta compared with the one manufactured and packaged or served in restaurants. I think that commercially this is done because for machines it might be difficult to handle the thin layers, which can be better handled by hand. In restaurants, I believe it is because thicker pasta can maintain better its shape, doesn't break easily, and can withstand larger amounts of filling, which in turn allow for bigger ravioli, for example, and therefore fewer of them are needed for filling a plate or serving. Please share your thoughts below if you know of other reasons or a better explanation than my guesses. I personally do not mind if some ravioli break. I really like that the pasta is soft and it almost melts in mouth. But this might be also a taste preference. Anyhow, using a pasta machine with various thickness settings for the rollers, I normally stop at the 8th setting, passing it twice in every single step for most of the pasta. And for the stuffed pasta, I use the 9th setting, passing it only once. With this kind of thin layer, the handling becomes tricky and the pasta can dry out quite quickly, hence the extra moisture to compensate. Only the maltagliati or pappardelle I like to stop at the 7th setting to keep them a little thicker and maintain a good ratio between thickness and width. To explain how I make maltagliati that have an irregular length and shape, I put together a small diagram and another for the more regular ones, from which I can obtain many types, from tagliolini to pappardelle, just changing and widening the cutting space. In these and other cases, there is the need of a sharp knife, so be careful using knives. Anyway, after all this chat, the dough is ready. I put it together by hand, and then it is really important to let it rest for at least 10 minutes, covered with cling film, ideally in an airtight seal. Once ready, should be soft but firm, and inside should be visible a lot of layers. Thank you for watching. If you like this video and you would like to see more, please consider clicking subscribe and the bell icon to be notified of new videos. See you next time.